Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome back to the Eternal set review for Defiance. It's time to continue with the second part of the Primal cards, so let's dive right in. Okay, so first we have Stormtamer Operative. That's the cool card that the community got to name. Community came up with a name Stormtamer and Direwolf tagged the Operative on it to make it more unseen flavor. Yeah. It's a 2-cost 2/3 and all spells deal -1 damage. Keep in mind that negative damage apparently heals you in Eternal, so that's kind of interesting. People found that out recently thanks to this card. Like Snowball that deals -1 damage if you have 2 operatives out actually heals for 1, which is not something that is super intuitive and people expected, but it can come up now with this card. Yeah, the card mainly, I guess, is aimed at cards like Torch and Hailstorm to make them from the menace they can be to these medium-sized aggressive decks to not quite cutting it anymore. The problem is that an otherwise vanilla 2/3 is not that great and constructed, and you really need to have a meta game where these cards are super dominant, especially Hailstorm, for this to be worth it, and also in a color combination where you're not, for example, playing Torch yourself. So in Skycrack, this is not something you want, and in some other colors it might just not come up enough. But for example, you need a lot of 3 health units that still don't die to a Hailstorm for 2, for example, and 2 Torches. So this mostly seems like a horror card, but yeah. We'll have to see. The thing is, it probably, while it seems a bit better than Leader's Apprentice, probably gonna suffer the same issue of just being kind of like this 2-cost 2/3 that hates a narrow amount of cards, and then in the end it's just worse than living with those cards and playing better individual cards instead. So yeah, unfortunately the chances of this doing a whole lot in Constructed are not very high. And in Limited, I mean, a 2-cost 2/3 is pretty good. If the effect doesn't really hurt your deck, it's an easy inclusion in most draft decks, I think. Next we have Windcloak, a 2-cost relic that does nothing unless you activate it, pay 4 to give one of your units flying this turn. This is another card that's aimed at Limited and at relic synergy specifically. Not particularly great at that, but I guess if your deck needs a way to break stalls, finish the game, sort of break through, then Windcloak might be a card to consider as a filler if the relic synergies also matter. But yeah, it's not a card I'm very happy with in my draft deck, I think. Next we have Courier Albatross. It's a 3-cost 2/2 with flying, and it has Amplify +1/+1 and draw a card. So this card is another limited card, of course. A 3-cost 2/2 flyer is decent in Limited, especially if it has a solid upside, and is basically being a 6-cost 3/3 flyer that draws you a card is pretty strong, and it can only get better from there on. If the game goes longer, in the super late game, it can sometimes be a 4/4 flyer for 9 that draws you 2 cards, which is not cheap, but in that game state, cost doesn't really matter. So yeah, seems like a pretty nice pick up for almost any Primal deck in Limited, really. Next we have Fledgling Avisaur. It's a 3-cost 1/2 with flying and Aegis, and on Renown you gain an Aegis. So yeah, clearly not a constructed staple, but also I think not a very good Limited card. I guess the fact that it's a body that flies and has Aegis makes it decent for weapons. The Renown helps a bit with that, but the Renown gain an Aegis that you gain an Aegis is not very valuable in Limited usually. So this all in all seems like it's going to be too weak in most decks, but if your deck has a lot of weapons and you just want a flying Aegis body to put them on to safely kill your opponent with, then this might fit your deck. Otherwise I would leave it on the bench. Next we have Glacier Shaper. It's a 3-cost 2/4 with Renown. You play a Glacial Monstrosity that has attack and health equal to the cost of the spell or weapon that you renowned with. And it also has Overwhelm. The card's actually kinda cool, like a 3-cost 2/4 is okay stats, and the Renown is really strong. The problem is, like, in Constructed, there are not a lot of like expensive things you want to use to Renown. Like the best thing that comes to mind is something like play this on 3 and turn 4, put like an Inquisitor's Blade or a Hammer of Might or something on it. Then you get like a 4/4 Overwhelm, which is nice. But the problem with Shaper basically is, I think, in Constructed, that it is too bad without Renown. Like a 3-cost 2/4 vanilla is just not very good in Limited, in Constructed, and you can't guarantee often enough that you get a Renown trigger out of it that does enough to make up for that. So it's just a bit too high variance, and the floor is too bad too often, I think. So it's not gonna make it. But keep in mind the effect is pretty powerful. Getting a free body that also has reasonable size, like especially getting like a 4/4 Overwhelm 4/0 while playing a weapon on this is pretty strong. But all in all, it's a bit too gimmicky, and it needs a bit too long to set up and stuff to get the value. And also then you're in Horu with a bunch of weapons, which also doesn't seem that great, and you might just prefer to put your weapons on an Aegis 3-drop rather than this guy. But yeah, it's a bit unfortunate because the card is pretty nice and has some appeal. It's just kind of like falling too short of ultimately being a real contender for Constructed. In Limited, however, this is pretty powerful. The 3-cost 2/4 is already very solid in Limited, and then slapping like a random 4 or 5-cost weapon on this is very brutal. So in Limited, this seems like a premium uncommon to me, if your deck has enough ways to trigger it in a meaningful way. That means like more expensive cards, 2 or 3-cost cards at least. Because getting a 1/1 out of this, not good. 2/2, not great, but fine. And once we play 3-cost stuff on this, we start talking. Next we have Shapeshifter's Mask. Pretty weird card. The 3-cost weapon, +1/+1, and at the end of your turn you transform it into a random unit that costs 1 more. So it basically casts Unstable Form on the unit every turn, and it also has +1/+1. But yeah, it's pretty random. It's also just gonna keep growing, but if you have something cool, if you're transformed into something cool, you can't really keep it, because next turn it transform again, and it's not like 1 cost more is automatically all better units, so you might still downgrade it the next turn and stuff. So yeah, it's a lot of variance. I mean, I guess it's kind of a cool and fun effect, which is probably what they were going for, but it's not something that I would want to put into my Constructed or even Limited deck, I think. Next we have Skycrag Scalebreaker. It's a 3-cost 3/3. On Fate you create and draw a Skycrag Goad with Flying, which is a weapon that gives +0/+2 and Flying for 4, so it's very expensive. Not great for Constructed. And yeah, if Skycrag Scalebreaker is renowned, he turns into a 5/3. So if you play this turn 3 and then turn 4 play the Goad on it, that means, yeah, she's a 5/5 flying. But that costs you 7 power, so that's a whole lot. So not too impressed. In Limited, however, this seems like a really good card. Both halves are very good, and together they're also very good. But in Constructed, this is just not good enough of a raid, and also takes a lot of work. And like the turn you play it, it's just a 3-cost 3/3, and yeah, there's a lot of things wrong with this in Constructed. But in Limited, it seems like a great 3-drop. Next we have Storm Spiral. It's basically a lightning storm for twice the cost that is fast and also deals damage to players. So yeah, not too great. The fact that it's fast is nice, but I think it should cost 3, not 4. And yeah, dealing 2 damage to players is like fine, but like not that big of a deal. It's just too expensive. Like at 3 it would be at least interesting to exist. This way it's just basically a bad Ursus choice. In Limited, however, this might still be something that you want to put in your deck, but in Constructed, this is playable. Next we have Clutch of Talons. I think that's one of the premium blue cards to come out of the new set. Probably the best blue card. Can't think of a better one right now. Like mono blue cards, not multi-faction cards. Yeah, card's really good. I think this is gonna be Primal constructed staple going forward in medium-sized aggressive and mid-range decks. A 4-cost +2/+2 and flying weapon is already fine. Not great though, so you're rarely going to play it as that, but having the option to, if you want or need to, is good. And usually this is going to be a 6-cost weapon that is basically like a 6-cost 5/5 flyer that gives one of your units +2/+2 and flying. Triple Primal is a bit restrictive, and if you ever get to like 8 and make 2 dragons with this, it should just outright win you the game. Card is pretty cool, pretty powerful, pairs well with Aegis, and so on. So there are a bunch of good things going on. We just gotta like figure out the card going forward, like see what's the right deck for it and stuff. But I think it should be one of the archetype supporting or creating cards from the new set probably. And in limited, this is obviously a stone cold bomb that should win you the game almost every time. Next we have Court Mage, the 4-cost 2/5 with Pledge, just one of these generic Pledge units for limited. Not great, but like 4-cost 2/5 is okay as a defensive body, and Pledge makes your colors and power better, so nothing too wrong with this as a filler, I think, in limited. Next we have Lens of Clarity, a 4-cost relic, more relic synergy stuff, and yeah, your spells deal +1 damage, so spell damage +1. Yeah, it's way too expensive for what it does, and spell damage just isn't that impressive in my experience, especially if it costs so much to set up and costs you an entire card. Like we have 2 units that have that effect, and one of them is even a pretty good unit without that text, like a 3-cost 3/3 flyer, and they still haven't really made it into constructed yet. So this is not gonna do it either, and even in limited, even if you care about relic synergies, this seems a pretty bad card. So I personally think this is pretty unplayable. Next we have Mass Antomancy, another limited card. Pretty good one in limited actually. You transform a unit into a 1/1 humbug, so it is worse than Polymorph since it costs more and the unit they get is flying. So that's definitely some downgrades here. But the fact that it has Amplify, that you can like transform the 2 best units on 8 power in a slower deck, is pretty strong. So this should be a pretty solid or even great card in limited despite the 1/1 humbugs. And in blue you usually have flyers yourself, so the 1/1 flyers aren't much better than 1/1 frogs would be. So yeah, seems like a pretty good limited card, I think. And yeah, it's like one thing about the Mass Antomancy, it's a bit comparable to Change Your Stick. It's not as good, but close. Like Change Your Stick is 6-cost, give a unit +1/+1 flying and polymorph, and this is like 8-cost, double slightly worse polymorph, which is still very, very strong. So not quite Change Your Stick, but still pretty good. Okay, this concludes the second part of the Primal review. I will be back tomorrow with the final part and the top 5 Primal cards before we move on to Shadow. I'll also be competing in the Eye of Winter Classic 3 later. I might be streaming it, I'm not sure. I might also play an artifact tournament at the same time, and then I won't be streaming. We'll see about that, how that pans out. If I don't get into the artifact tournament, I'll probably play the entire Eye of Winter on stream for you guys. So make sure to follow me on Twitter and Facebook and on Twitch to not miss out on that, and also other news and updates. And of course, if you enjoy the content, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification icon to not miss out on content uploads. If you want to further support me, please consider whitelisting eternaltitans.com and YouTube. That would really help our team and team website, as well as my YouTube channel, continue to grow and put out free content for you guys. That's the easiest way to support us without even having to spend or donate any money yourself. Okay, all the most of the information we talked about can also be found in the description of the video as clickable links and stuff, so that makes it even easier for you guys. This was the Eternal Set review with Primal Part 2. I'm your host Manu S. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time with Part 3. Bye!